Republicans are abandoning their crusade to repeal the Affordable Care Act. None of the Republican Senate nominees running in 8 battleground states have it on their websites, and those candidates have scarcely mentioned the law or health insurance policy in general while on the campaign trail. So for the first time in over a decade, the future of Obamacare won't be a driving issue at the ballot box. Let's bring in NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, who writes about how the Republican Party's appetite for undoing former President Obama's signature law has faded. Where did it go? Because they were hell-bent on getting rid of it. It was a campaign promise.
Yeah, it's a dizzying shift for the Republicans, Mika. After 12 years and election after election of hammering this issue, campaigning on repealing Obamacare, suddenly all that talk has faded and you're not hearing a peep out of it. Kevin McCarthy in the House recently put out an agenda that doesn't mention the ACA at all. Mitch McConnell in the Senate has been completely silent about the issue, and his allies tell me that there's a recognition the ACA is likely here to stay. Rick Scott put out a very aggressive agenda, the campaign chief on the conservative front, and that doesn't mention the ACA at all. And key House Republicans, including those who want to run the levers of health care policy, as well as hard-right members of the Freedom Caucus, tell me that they want to move past the repeal conversation. In the 2022 campaign trail, you have to struggle really hard to see any evidence of Republicans campaigning on health care, much less repeal of the ACA. One Republican Senate candidate, Joe O'Dea of Colorado, told me he supports the Affordable Care Act. Let's put the statement up on the screen. It's quite remarkable. He said, I'm opposed to repealing the Affordable Care Act. He said there were some problems that that the law had when it was initially enacted. Those problems have been resolved. And he goes on to say the ACA's protection for individuals with pre-existing conditions was one of the most important reforms passed in a generation, unquote. Now, why are Republicans backing away from this? Well, I have to take you back to 2017 to understand this. Republicans had the trifecta then, the White House, the House, and the Senate, and they attempted to undo the Affordable Care Act. It was a political disaster. Their replacement plan did not poll well with the American public, and Democrats hammered them for it. And it just kind of drove home the idea that you can't have the nice things in the ACA, the pre-existing condition protections, without the other things like the government regulations and the subsidies that make it function. That recognition has dawned on the Republicans, and they paid a backlash. They paid a price for it in the 2018 elections, and they don't want to go back there anymore. So what does this all mean? It means after coming one vote away in the Supreme Court from wiping out the Affordable Care Act, coming one vote away in Congress from repealing it in 2017, remember that famous John McCain thumbs down? It looks like President Obama's signature achievement is safer than ever and here to stay.
It's Jonathan. I'm old enough to think this would have been crazy that Republicans would have backed away from their fight to overturn ACA. You mentioned Senator Rick Scott. He's become a useful foil for this White House in the midterms here. And certainly Biden is saying, hey, we're going to defend this. But talk to us. You said Republicans are walking away from the ACA. Tell us about Democrats on the campaign trail. Is this something they're actively full-throat embrace, or are they just trying to say, hey, it's the law of the land and not make that big a deal out of it? How are they approaching it?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, Jonathan. Some Democrats I speak to say they don't entirely believe Republicans, that they won't actually go back to this if they gain power. Senator Chris Van Hollen, the Maryland Democrat, mentioned that Democrats also believe that Roe versus Wade was here to stay, and that went away. So his quote to me was, always be vigilant. There are other Democrats, like Senator Raphael Warnock, who's running a tight re-election battle in Georgia, who say the ACA hasn't fully been implemented, in part because one component of it, the Medicaid expansion, which is optional for states, has not been taken up by some Republican governors, including in his state of Georgia. And there are hundreds of thousands of, his residents, his constituents in that coverage gap. So the argument from Democrats is, A, don't believe the Republicans just because they're not campaigning on it. And there's still more work to be done to fully implement the ACA. So we still see a little bit of a fissure there, even if it's not about the issue of repeal.